Hello everyone and welcome back to our JavaScript beginner course. So far we have covered some exciting topics such as variables and data types, operators and conditionals, loops, iterations, functions, scopes, arrays and objects. And today we are going to dive into the concept of error handling and debugging in JavaScript, which is an essential tool for every JavaScript developer. What you'll learn today is common JavaScript errors and how to fix them, using try-catch for error handling, and debugging tips and console tricks. So let's get started with the first topic, that is common JavaScript errors. One of the common errors that you might face is a syntax error, which is mistake in the code structure. Suppose you are supposed to write console.log hello world, but then you miss a parentheses or to end the parentheses. Now usually code editors like VS Code and our own code in compiler closes the parentheses automatically for you as soon as you open them. If this happens, it might result in a syntax error. So you can see that syntax error is occurred. Now yesterday what happened with me while recording a video for JavaScript objects was that I forgot to add a comma after I defined a property of the object. Suppose let person equals name is suppose Alice. Now I forgot to add the comma and define a method for it, like greeting or greet equals or colon function. So this will result in a syntax error as well, because there is no comma after this property, so it says unexpected identifier. So if I put a comma, this should be resolved and not output to anything, since we have not printed anything out. So you should be careful and check if your syntax is correct or not for your code. Another type of error that you might encounter is a reference error, which is a case where you use a variable that has yet to be declared. For example, let me remove this and type out console.log age. Now you might notice that we haven't declared a variable called age yet, so it will result in a reference error. So reference error, age is not defined. In order to avoid this, you should make sure that the variable that you are using or referencing is already defined, or at least declared. So equals 25. So it will resolve the reference error. And remember, we used to put null values for the variables that we wanted to declare but did not know what value to put in. So if we even declare a variable and put its value as null, at least the reference error won't occur and it will output to null. So make sure that you have defined your variable before you reference it or before you use it. Moving on to the next type of error, we have type errors. Type errors are the errors that occur when you try to use a value incorrectly. So let me demonstrate with an example. If I define a variable called let num equals to 5 and then use console.log num dot to uppercase, which is a method for strings, it will output to a type error. So type error num.toUppercase is not a function. So we should use data types appropriately. Now if I type out Alex instead of a number data type, that is a string, it should output to uppercase Alex. So in order to avoid type errors, make sure you're using methods on the correct data types. And these were the different types of errors that we can encounter during programming in JavaScript. Now, what if we could prevent our entire program from crashing when an error happens? That's where try-catch comes in. Instead of letting the entire program crash, JavaScript catches the mistake and handles it gracefully. And let me show you how. This is the syntax for a try-catch in JavaScript. You write the try keyword, then open a block of code with curly braces and type out the code where an error might occur. Let's say we type out console.log x. Now this will result in an error because x is not defined yet. So this will result in a reference error. Now JavaScript tries to execute the code inside the try block, and if everything goes well, great, it moves forward. But if an error occurs, it immediately jumps to the catch block. So catch, and we have to define a variable, let's say error for this. Now what happens is, if an error occurs, all the details about the error are stored in this variable right here. And open the catch block with curly braces and console.log and error occurred. And then error dot message, which contains the actual error message for the error that occurred. And this catch block prevents the program from stopping unexpectedly, and instead of crashing, we get a helpful message. So let's see what this outputs to. So as we can see, an error occurred, X is not defined. This is the error message that is printed out from console.log. So we should use the try catch block to handle errors gracefully, and it gives you details about what went wrong, and without it, errors can crash your entire program. So thus we should use the try catch. Now just a heads up, it is not absolutely necessary to use console.log inside the catch block. The catch block is to write code that you want to execute in case of an error. So if an error occurs and you want to execute a specific code, you can include it inside the catch block, and it can be anything like alert or any other function. This is just to know what type of error occurred and a useful tool in JavaScript for development. And that is it for try catch. Now that we know how to handle errors, let's talk about debugging. Debugging is the process of finding and fixing issues in our code. So effective debugging saves time and helps us write cleaner and more reliable programs. Let's explore three essential tools that are console.log, console.error, and debugger. First, using console.log to track values. So let's say I have declared a variable called let total equals 10 plus 5, and I type out console.log total is total. So it is printing out total is 15, so we know that the value 15 is being stored in total. Now console.log is very useful to print messages onto the console, which helps us to track the flow of the execution, and it also helps us to verify whether variables are holding the expected values at different points of the code. And we can use it to check values on step by step while developing and testing our code. So if an error occurs somewhere, we can test up to which point are values being printed out as expected using console.log. So this is a very useful tool in debugging. For example, if you want to see, if we update the value of total right here, and we print this line only at the end, it'll output to your total is 25. Now suppose we didn't know what value total was holding up until this point right here above line 3. We could just write console.log to check what value total is holding. So by using console.log, we can find out that up to this point of the code, the value that total is holding is 15, and it is updated later. So console.log is useful for these situations. The next method that is useful for debugging is using console.error to highlight errors. So unlike console.log, console.error is used specifically to log errors, and it displays messages in red in most browsers' dev tools, which makes it easier to identify and distinguish errors from the regular logs. If your code encounters an issue, you can use console.error to provide a clear feedback. So I'm going to demonstrate it with a small example. You can write age, let age equals to -1. Now if age is less than 0, then console dot error age cannot be less than 0. So if you have a certain condition that will result in an error, you can provide a console message which says age cannot be less than 0 in this case. So it should output to age cannot be less than 0 since age is less than 0 here. Now if I were to try this out on VS Code, just to show you an example, open VS Code, the previous folder that we opened, that is JavaScript and script.js. I'll remove this and paste this here. I'll show you the difference between console.log and console.error. So console.error, console.log, age cannot be less than 0. Let's save this and run this on the live server. And then we'll go on to inspect to see the DevTools. So you can see that console.log prints out this plain message, while console.error specifically highlights the error with a red message box saying age cannot be less than 0. So this is how you use console.error to highlight errors. So hope that's clear. And up next and last, we have debugger for step-by-step code execution. The debugger statement is a powerful tool that pauses the execution of your script at the specified line when running in a browser's developer tools. So I am going to show you this through the help of VS Code once again. Now, if I were to declare a variable called let sum equals 0 and then let I equals to 0, this is our loop variable, while I is less than 4, let's say, or 5, we can update the value of the sum plus equals I, and then I plus plus, and let's say I want to see the sum at the end of the loop, console.log sum. Now if I want to check the value of sum and I during each loop cycle, I may want to put the debugger keyword here. Now I'll show you what this does in a bit. It helps us to step through our code line by line and inspect variables and their values at specific points. So I'll show you this by opening the live server and then going to inspect. Now if I go to sources and reload, we can see that this website is paused in debugger, which helps us see at this point the value of I and sum are both 0. Now if I go on to the next point, step over next function call, we can see that the value of sum at this point is still 0 since 0 is being added to the sum, the value of I. At the next point, we can see that the value of I is still 0. Now after this point, the value of I should increase by 1, and let's see if this happens. So we can see that in the next iteration of the loop, the value of I is updated. Now when I reach at this point once again, the value of sum should be 1. So sum is equal to 1. So it is evident from this that we can check the value of our variables at specific points of the code and observe how the program flows and where potential issues might occur. So this is extremely useful to debug and find out errors or just to check values. I hope it is clear from that example as well. So using these tools effectively will help you catch and fix bugs faster, leading to smoother and more efficient coding. And that is it for debugging. So before we wrap it up, as always, here's a fun challenge for you, which is to write a function that takes two numbers as input and divides them. And you can use the try catch to handle errors when dividing by 0. And I'm going to provide you a small hint. This is the hint, more like the full code, and I'm giving this as a hint because you have to find out what the throw new error line does, this if condition right here. And in the next episode, we'll be talking about JavaScript ES6 features, so make sure you tune in. hit a like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys in the next one.